Will UConn and Duke soon be conference opponents? You're Locked On UConn.
You are Locked On UConn, your daily podcast on the UConn Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Do me a quick favor, see that little button on the bottom of your screen, click subscribe, helps our channel grow, helps our audience grow, and frankly, I truly appreciate it. All of your support, it's invaluable to me and invaluable to the Locked On Podcast Network. If you're listening in your car or on some kind of audio device, when you finish the show, do me a favor, shoot me a 5-star review. And finally, a special shout out to our everydayers. Thanks for giving this new UConn content a shot and helping spread the gospel of UConn hoops. Today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. Terms and conditions may apply. We welcome to the show publisher Conor O'Neill, publisher of Devils Illustrated, Deacons Illustrated, Heisman voter, and a lifelong Timberwolves fan. So go Chris Smith and go Danielle Marshall. Conor, let me ask you the first question. What are the chances that UConn and Duke are playing their next game against each other in a regular season conference game?
Oh my gosh. Just because I think that wait, did you qualify with regular season?
Yeah, regular season.
Okay. That complicates it because I think they're headed on a collision course in the NCAA tournament one of these years coming up soon.
Potentially, yeah.
So if it's regular season, probably, I don't know, 30%, 35%, somewhere in there. I don't. It's just it's such a. Everything is fog of war right now with conference consolidation and realignment, and you have two mega conferences that are growing with football being the only impetus, and I don't see UConn or Duke being attractive when you put football at the head of the discussion. So I think that creates the need for a basketball-centric league, and UConn on the East Coast, Duke on the East Coast. I think it makes sense in that regard for both of these schools to wind up in a conference where they're seeing each other twice a year. Think of the ratings boost. I know we love to talk about ratings because TV ratings dictate everything right now, but think of the ratings you'd get if Duke and UConn played 2 games a year in basketball.
Yeah, I juxtaposition that to, because I did a show a couple weeks ago about, or it might have been last week. What would it look like? What would Madison Square Garden look like if it was the semifinal Saturday was Duke, UConn on one side, and then you had maybe an old power like Villanova against another ACC opponent, or like a Carolina, or even Syracuse. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, just what it doesn't even have to be, the blue bloods, if you will, right? My next question to you then is, because it kind of plays off of that. Could there be a situation where Duke and Carolina break off of each other? You know what I mean? Because they're that in ACC rivalry is steeped with history. I want to see UConn in a league with one, if not both of these teams. What are the chances that Duke kind of severs their ties and goes that kind of, hey, we're more of a basketball school. Our football program is fine, but we're a basketball program. We're always going to be.
I think it's growing more likely. I'm not calling up North Carolina House of Representatives for this information. Like, I'm going off of what other people are saying and reporting. But it seems like North Carolina and NC State are the ones tied at the hip because they're the ones under state control, and Duke is a private university. UNC and NC State want to be good at football. I think Duke also wants to be good at football, but not on the level of desire as the other two. Certainly, nobody wants to be better at football than NC State right now. I think Carolina is a notch below that, and I think Duke is a notch or two below that. So, yeah, And then again, just the reading the winds of change here. Like tradition is dying out everywhere across college athletics. It's just, I mean, I think we have to start preparing now so that we're not, hit with a sledgehammer to the back of the head 10 years from now when Duke and Carolina all of a sudden is a, December 17th game.
Right.
And I'll have to go back and delete all my tweets making fun of the Louisville, Kentucky rivalry when people say that's the greatest rivalry in college basketball, and say the greatest rivalry in college basketball is not a non-conference game played in December, because I think the greatest rivalry in college basketball is Duke Carolina. So I think you have to start preparing now for the reality of that. I think if it never happens, then great. You prepared yourself for something bad that actually didn't happen. So that's a good thing. But I think that's the path we're headed.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think from UConn's side of things, I did a show yesterday where it's kind of like the Big East has been able to kind of sit back and kind of watch all of this from afar. They've kept their 11-team conference. Nobody's left. No one's been asked to leave. We haven't added any other teams. There's no Tulane's, or there's no, we didn't snag a Pac-12 school to kind of fill out, to make it even. It kind of puts us in a unique position, at least with UConn, to play 20 Big East games. Everyone plays each other twice. And so, but I definitely see them taking this year and then kind of just seeing kind of what happens with the ACC, because it seems like the ACC as we know it is dying because of the addition of, what's the Atlantic Coast Conference? What was the joke, right? It's any coast conference, because now you have people, all the coast conferences. Yep. So, I mean, I think that's where we're at. And could you see, because I brought all this stuff up, I thought about it, and then I read Pat Forty's article in Yahoo and then Coach K chimes in and says, we should call the Big East. We should call Val Ackerman because they think about basketball all the time. Is there a chance, for all the people in my YouTube mentions that tell me I'm crazy when it comes to basketball-centric league, football playing separate, could you see a scenario where the Big East ACC have some kind of partnership where it's like the basketball teams that want to play basketball in a basketball league can do that, and our Olympic sports come with us? Football is a completely separate entity. Do you think that's where we're going in college sports?
That's my pipe dream. I think it's the pipe dream of a lot of other people. It seems like that's not realistic because the football coaches don't want to break it away. I think there has to be unification, or at least close to a consensus from the football side of things. And even though it makes sense to you, me, and hundreds of thousands, millions of other people, football coaches don't want to break away from the conferences and kind of do their own thing, which again,
I think they would. Would you think they would? Because they already do their own thing.
Like right. Like the college football playoff is not an NCAA thing. Everything about the bowl structure and the postseason structure is not under the NCAA umbrella. It's the only sport that doesn't have NCAA sponsored championships.
Yeah, and that's so true, and that's a great point. And I also pointed out that under these new rules, Notre Dame, who's an independent, we all know this in football, right? They joined everywhere else, but they're an independent in football, would have been able to make the college football playoff in 7 of the last 12 seasons if there was a 12-team playoff, because they were 12th or better 7 of the last 12 years. So you don't need a conference in particular to be a football power. Basketball, different story.
Yeah, I mean, look at UConn. What conference were they in before they came back to the Big East? Or
AAC, the American.
And how did they do in the American compared to what they did when they come back into the Big East?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think some would argue on the UConn side that the recruiting suffered, but there was a national championship was on the back end of everyone from that Big East year, like that transition year to the American. So there's pros and cons to it. I don't think Dan Hurley would have been able to recruit the players that he got if he wasn't playing in the Big East. So I do feel as if, well, I don't care. I'm a traditionalist, but if we don't call the Big East anymore and we just become something else, I joked around, we can call it the the championship collective, the legacy conference, having Duke, Carolina, like all these, even if we snagged NC State in, I know NC State's the little brother here in North Carolina, but they've won 2 national championships in basketball. So, like whatever that criteria is, having Gonzaga in it, maybe, like these are things that I feel like needs to happen, and I hope happen here in the near future.
There's a lot more cachet with the NC State name than there was 2 months ago.
That's right.
3 months ago, I guess.
Absolutely. Well, listen, we're gonna dive into the head coaches of UConn and Duke coming up after this. Hey everyone, you may have known that I owned a professional recruiting business. I know firsthand how crucial it is to find the right professionals for your team. When you're hiring for a small business, you want a quality candidate that fits the role perfectly. That's why you need to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools you need to help find the best professionals faster and for free. Back when I was running my business, the challenge was always finding the right talent quickly. I remember countless hours spent sifting through resumes and conducting interviews, but then I started using LinkedIn Jobs and everything changed. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. It's a professional network that connects you with candidates that you won't find anywhere else, even though those aren't actively looking for could be the perfect fit for your role. I can't tell you how many times I found top-notch professionals on LinkedIn. In fact, over 70% of users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not using LinkedIn, you're missing out. Crazy stat alert, LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses find a qualified candidate within 24 hours. 86%. That's insane. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals like a professional. So if you're looking to hire, post your job for free at linkedinjobs.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions may apply. Okay, let's bring back Conor. Conor, again, thanks for joining us today. In terms of these two programs, they almost mirror each other in different ways because they're the only two programs since the early 90s that have won all of their national titles in the modern era, in the field of 64, field of 68, if you will. So there's that. The fan bases dislike each other immensely. Most of UConn fandom, in particular myself, when I was younger, I had a guest on the other day who did a podcast. He did a podcast called the Dream Season Pod, where Duke ended up beating UConn in 1989-90, right? So there are still remnants of this fan base that loathe Duke beyond measure because of the fact that they've always were kind of ahead of UConn. Now it seems as though UConn has nudged ahead a little bit, at least on the title side. And it looks like we're in a renaissance period of having a Dan Hurley-led team. What do you say to Devils Illustrated readers, to the fan base of Duke when it comes to UConn and John Shire? Like, what's the approach there? Like his approach in general. Have you been a fan of it? Do you feel like Duke fans are a fan of it? What's the other side of the coin?
Personally, I think John has done a great job. I think one of the hardest things to do, not just in sports, but in any walk of life, is replace somebody who is established and successful. And then you talk about to the level that Mike Krzyzewski was established and successful for 40 years. It's damn hard to step into those shoes. And 227-9 seasons, 1 ACC championship, 1 Elite Eight appearance. Like, some Duke fans, that's not enough. I think that's pretty unrealistic. I'm not going to talk about recruiting titles, but I am going to talk about where the recruiting has stayed. Like, it's stayed at the highest level possible. There's been no drop off there. So, and the thing that I've liked the most that John has done is John isn't going to come out and say it because he kind of can't, but he has evolved Duke where it needed to evolve. He's hired assistant coaches that aren't former Duke captains, which I think you've got to go back to it's either the 90s or the early 2000s. I did the research when Jay Lucas was hired a couple years back. Jay Lucas was the first assistant hired by Duke since either the 90s or early 2000s who was not a Duke captain. Like he came from it was an outside the family hire. John did the same thing last year in bringing in Emmanuel Dildy. Duke had basically the first general manager in essentially college athletics when they hired Rachel Baker to run their NIL program. The structure of the coaching staff at Duke changed. They and a lot of other college basketball teams were scout by opponent, right? You had your 3 assistants, you'd go game by game, and each assistant would have each game. So every third game would be a certain assistant's game plan. Teams are shifting more toward the NBA coaching style, where you have an offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator,
sure,
and then your player development roles. Well, that's what Duke's coaching staff has been the last 2 years. Jay Lucas is the defensive coordinator. Chris Carroll has been the offensive coordinator. And then it was Emil Jefferson the first year. It's Emmanuel Dildy now in that kind of player development role. So, and the non-conference scheduling is the other side of this. How many years upon years did people other than Duke fans complain about Duke not playing tough non-conference games on the road in November and December? This year they're going to Arizona. Like you put a home and home on the schedule, and you schedule somebody who's perennially.
Yeah, you're right.
They're going to be, that Arizona is going to be in the Ken Palm top 25, net
Sure.
top 30. It's going to be a quad 1 at the end of the season. Go play those games. And the side note there is I've thought it did more harm to Duke than good to not play those types of games, because they'd get into their ACC opener on the road and go lose to somebody like Boston College or Virginia Tech. And you're thinking, how did this team full of uber talented players lose to this team? Because they hadn't been on the road and they've been in college for 2 months. But
no, you're spot on. And I'll point out, I'll pull a Coach K, because this is what he did to me. I did a piece on that. I did a podcast story on scheduling, the difference between mid-major basketball and high-powered, Power 5 basketball, and Duke being the biggest culprit of not playing road games. And it was a Wake Forest ACC conference road game opener, if you will, right? Mm-hmm. And I asked Coach K, did you see a difference in the way your team responded to a road game, seeing as how this is the first true road game you have? And he kind of did not like that line of questioning. So I think my UConn street cred went up a lot of points in the UConn streets for questioning Coach K's scheduling. And I listen. I think most sane people, and I like to consider myself to be somewhat sane, that we may talk a lot of crap about each other's teams, and not you specifically, but the fan bases. But sure, there's a level of, I feel like now UConn fans finally kind of have a equal footing. We're the hunted now. So I wanted to do this show because I wanted to juxtapose kind of like what Duke is doing right now is different than what they've ever really had to do. They've had the Coach K that has kind of set a set of standards, if you will, and every other team is trying to chase those standards, right? And now it's almost like the opposite. Dan Hurley has won back-to-back national championships. So my question to you is, do you think, even with these changes that Shire and his team has made, do you think that there's like a thought process to a copycat? Everyone knows the NFL is a copycat league. UConn has done some really interesting kind of formulaic things with the transfer portal, with recruiting. Do you think there'll be any changes with the way he recruits? Because we see that they're, the number one recruiting class in the country. We know that they got Cooper Flag over UConn, all of that. But that hasn't translated, even though they made the Elite Eight this year, no disrespect, right? That hasn't translated to what Duke wants, right? Duke fans want, which is them to be in the Final Four, competing for national championships. Do you think that there's going to be some pushback if they don't do well this year to Duke standards, to potentially be like, hey, the way Kentucky fans were like, hey, can we get Dan Hurley down here? Like that was all we heard in the offseason as UConn fans and on this show. Wait until you lose your coach, because we're going to come and throw a big bag of money at him, and he's going to come down to Kentucky and all this other stuff. So is there going to be that kind of outrage if they're not at that UConn standard in the future?
I think so. It's really interesting right now to talk about this right now because there's nobody signed in Duke. There's nobody committed. Nobody can sign yet. There's nobody committed in Duke's 2025 class.
Yep.
And usually, like at this point, the last 2 cycles, Duke has already had a guard committed, and their classes started to really form over the summer, and they've basically had everything locked up by the start of preseason stuff. Where you go with that is Duke brought in 3 transfers that are going to be rotational guys. They got a 4th transfer, but he's basically a practice player from Rice. Mm-hmm. They brought in 3 transfers that are going to make them older. And as crazy as it is to say about a team that is bringing in 6 freshmen, and you're counting on, one of them to be the number 1 overall pick. You're counting on your center to be a guy who's been playing basketball for 4 years to be probably a starting center and rim protector and top 5 pick. And You're probably counting on at least 2 of the 4 other freshmen to be contributors in the rotation. Maybe not starters, but you need them to be in the mix, able to help you win games when it matters. They brought in 3 transfers to get older. Like, make no mistake about it, Duke knows that they were too young at certain points in the last 2 years. And they couldn't, they tried, they couldn't really get older from John's first season to second season. I'm not sure about how much older they could have gotten coming into John's first year because he had 1 rotation player coming back and he signed a massive class with Lively, Whitehead, Flip, Proctor, all those guys. So I do think, I don't know, like Duke will never admit that they're following the same game plan as another school. They're Duke. It's the whole Quinn Cook, Duke is never the underdog, shouting that. But I do think what you've seen Duke do in the transfer portal this year, bring in a guy like Malik Brown from Syracuse, guy like Sion James from Tulane, and a guy like Mason Gillis from Purdue. These kind of gritty, grimy, they're going to help you in certain areas. They're not, they were rumored a couple years ago to be in on Baylor Shireman. I don't think Duke is ever going to bring in a transfer to that level. Like, I don't think Duke is going to bring in the transfer that everybody in the country wants. At least not as long as Duke is signing classes with 3 5-stars. Right? Like, no transfer is looking at a situation and saying, well, yeah, I want to go there, even though they have 3 of the best high school kids in the country coming in, because I'm going to play over them. Like, that's just, it's unrealistic. I think what Duke is going to do in the portal is what they've done this year, is get your kind of role players is probably a little bit too negative and too disrespectful.
Everyone plays a No, I don't think so, Connor, because role is, everyone plays a role. Right. Like whether you're Cooper Flagg and your role is you're the star, that's a role, right? So that I feel like that gets overplayed, and you don't have to qualify it here. Like, that's, everyone is a role player. You're a point guard, you're a wing player, maybe you're the best role player, a deep, like, rebounder, defensive stopper, whatever it is. I guess my only question is, and this is more about college basketball, like, and it's maybe more Duke and UConn specific, but I wonder if more people, because of what happened with the Calipari situation, him leaving Kentucky after being there for 15 years, and kind of rinse, recycle, repeat, and them not getting past the first weekend multiple years in a row. Mm-hmm. Could you see something like that happening at Duke if Shire has a misstep with this massive class that's supposed to be like the number 1 recruiting class in the country? If it falls flat, even if it gets to, let's say like a Sweet 16, could you see them be like, hey, maybe we need to revisit this and say, let's get 1 or 2 recruits and then pieces of, guys that are going to stick around to develop for 1 or 2 years, just to kind of mix it up a little bit. I'm curious.
See, I don't think so. Because I think the last few years, it's basically been Duke and Kentucky alone in trying to major in the one and done recruiting. Like, they're the ones that have tried to bring in these big freshman classes with all of the talent they could accumulate and put it all together and have it come together in 4 months and then see what they can do in the NCAA tournament. Now that Calipari is at Arkansas, it kind of presses a reset button on his cycle. He's got to recruit to a different place that doesn't have quite the, cachet. The aura of being at Kentucky. Like, it's cool that he's at Arkansas, but that's not Kentucky. It kind of leaves Duke as the only program that can do that kind of thing in high school recruiting, that can assemble these super classes, if you will. The problem with that is there's not a super class every year. Like, the freshman class this past year was not a super class. That's why the draft is going to be awful next month.
Yep.
So
mediocre.
It's a dangerous road to go down, and that's why, that's why you wind up looking at what Duke was able to do this year without having a class like that. You need to have some retention. So I think Duke winds up being, I don't know if they'll be the unicorn. I'm sure they'll have some other team, like you'll have your Rutgers that pops up and they're able to get Dylan Harper,
take 2 or 3. Yep.
Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey.
Yep.
Duke really wanted Dylan Harper, but they're not going to go undefeated in that regard. You're going to have a Baylor. Baylor has brought in a really good class, and Baylor got VJ Edgecombe, who Duke really wanted. But as far as year in, year out, I think Duke might be the only school that is consistently right there bringing in those types of classes.
Yeah, and honestly, and this is not a maybe a slight, but I think that's music to UConn fans' ears because it hasn't worked. So in even like when you go back all the way to Coach K and like the Zion, RJ Barrett days, those are some incredible players, some incredible talent that weren't able to get the job done. But time will tell. No, I'm not specifically talking to you, Connor, but are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting. Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're going to change gears and talk all-time Duke versus all-time UConn coming up after this. As a family man with 3 kids, managing investments in retirement accounts can be a lot. That's why I use Yahoo Finance to consolidate my Schwab investment account and Fidelity 401k into one convenient hub. For over 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the #1 destination for investors. Whether you're a seasoned investor or simply seeking expert guidance, Yahoo Finance offers all the tools and data you need in one place. Securely linking your brokerage accounts with Yahoo Finance for a unified view of your wealth, including 401k and other investments. Gain comprehensive insights to effectively manage your wealth. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit yahoofinance.com, the #1 financial institution. Okay, we bring back Conor O'Neill of Devils Illustrated. Duke versus UConn, a refrain we haven't seen in quite a while, but hopefully we'll see it either conference or non-conference in the next couple years here. But I wanted to do a fun exercise. I don't think I've ever done this with anyone before. UConn versus Duke all time. And we're going to do your starters versus UConn starters. And you get 5 bench players too. So, and it doesn't have to be the way I did it. There's stars everywhere, but there's also a couple guys, at least just one, that I feel like is more of a specialty player. That if this was a realistic thing where they were playing, could affect the game pretty well. So give me your point guard. Who are you going with that point guard for Duke? We'll go 1-1.
So let me qualify. Like, this is the most recency bias Duke team you'll ever see. I tried to keep it to guys that I have at least seen play basketball in person or will see, to give a hint of one of them coming. But it'll be blasphemy for Duke fans and probably any basketball fans that like Christian Laettner is not on this list. Bobby Hurley is not my point guard. I just like, I'm 34 years old. I tried to keep it to guys that like I was alive when Christian Laettner was at Duke, but I was 2.
Yep.
So
I got you. I understand.
I tried to keep it to guys that I've actually like experienced. So point guard, I have Tyus Jones.
Okay. For my point guard, I have Kemba Walker. I think that was a pretty easy one for me. Kemba is a all-time UConn player, numbers hanging in Gameplay Pavilion. So that one, I don't know. I think that I don't know if we're going to go back and forth. And this isn't a debate show, and I don't want it to be.
No.
So
two national championship point guards there.
That's right. Who's your shooting guard? Who do you have a shooting guard?
I went JJ.
That's a good pick. But people gave me crap about this, but is Richard Hamilton. I put him at shooting guard, even though he was kind of more of a wing in college. But this is hypotheticals, so we got to go that route.
As a Wizards fan, I really appreciate that pick. And one of the reasons I dislike Michael Jordan is because Michael Jordan had Rip Hamilton traded to Detroit because Rip Hamilton didn't kiss the ring and like defer to Jordan when he was the owner, player, quasi coach of the Wizards at the end of his career.
I got you. Okay. Blasphemy, Jordan. But I mean, listen, you did him a favor. You traded him to Detroit. You won a championship. So thanks. Thank you, MJ. Who do you got at small forward or your wing?
I have Jason Tatum there.
That's a good one, but I got Ray Allen, so I think I win there. But I don't know. That's a Jason Tatum today. Jason Tatum in college versus Ray Allen in college. I think Ray Allen's got him just because he was a consensus All-American, Big East Player of the Year, etc. Okay, power forward.
I went Zion.
Oof, it's a beast. He was a beast in college. He's going to bully Donyell Marshall. That's who I have. I have Donyell Marshall.
The most electric college basketball season we've seen, I think, probably in the last decade, maybe longer.
Yeah, I mean, listen, when your shoe is falling off because you have that twitchy of a body, but I wonder if that's the reason why he gets hurled this time. I don't know.
The only things that stopped Zion that year were a blown out shoe and Coach K drawing up the final play against Michigan State for RJ Barrett instead of him.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Coach K. What about center? Who you got at center?
See, this is definitely the most recency bias pick I could possibly have. And I built this as a team thing.
Yeah, me too.
I've got guys like Redick, Tatum, and Zion need the ball. I don't need a center that needs the ball. So I went Derek Lively.
I love that. I went Okafor because even though Okafor was a scorer in college, if you said to Emeka Okafor, "Hey, you're on an all-time team. All we need from you is defense," he'd be like, "Cool, got it. 5 blocks a game. I'm in."
All I want from the center position when I'm looking at who else is on this roster, I only want defense.
I agree with you because I have we have a ball dominant point guard in Kemba. We have a guy who's running around on screens with Richard Hamilton. Ray Allen was not ball dominant in college, maybe a little more with Calhoun's offense. Donyell Marshall was kind of a hybrid. He could do it all. So I feel like this was definitely well-rounded. You could definitely put these guys in the Mount Rushmore of UConn basketball.
Yeah.
But I also feel like they would fit well as a team. That's interesting. Who do you got on your bench? This will be an interesting one.
So I got thrown off because I did a 3-man bench first, and then
that's fine.
I figured out I had to add 2 in there. So I threw together my backup guards would be Austin Rivers and Quinn Cook.
Okay.
Give me some versatility, give me some shot making, give me a little flair in Austin Rivers' case. Probably have to make sure he doesn't disrupt the chemistry too much there.
Yep.
I'm bringing Cooper Flagg off the bench, and
is that allowed? I don't know if that's allowed. I don't know if he's not a Duke player yet.
If we revisit this in like 7 or 8 months, maybe he's a starter.
Yeah, maybe.
But yeah. Okay. I hope that was allowed. Like he's been a Duke player for 2 years.
I think he was born a Duke player. Let's just be honest, right?
Yeah.
Let's be honest. He's the profile. Okay. I got guys. I wanted bigger guys and I wanted longer guys defensively. a couple guys can score off the bench, and I think that's what I wanted to. Like, I have Shabazz Napier as the backup point guard. I have Rudy Gay and Caron Butler to back up Richard Hamilton and Ray Allen. Just from a length perspective, Rudy Gay is 6'8". In college, he was like,
oh, you don't have to tell me about Rudy Gay,
right?
Baltimore guy.
Okay, and then my other two are I don't know if this is probably a little before your time, but this is from the 89-90 team. The Dov Hennefeld was nicknamed the Israeli Larry Bird, and he came into college having played in Israel. And played one season for Jim Calhoun and broke the record for most steals by a freshman in the NCAA tournament, like the NCAAs ever. It still holds.
Wow.
I think he averaged like 3.9 steals a game. They used to press, and he was literally it was like almost like having Ed Reed for using another Baltimore reference for you to kind of pick off passes, quickest hands you've ever seen, really good shooter, little Mr. Do It Everything. And then I have Donovan Clingan, again, another guy that you can bring off the bench, doesn't need to score, just dominate the paint. And that was a fun exercise. I had fun with that one because, like you said, I didn't really want to go like crazy, like, oh, all of the best scorers, all of the best this. So I wanted to give it a little bit of a team feeling as well.
Yeah, you can easily pull up a school's all-time leading scorers list and just go down the list and say, like, here's my point guard, here's my shooting guard, I think that's boring. I want to build a team the way I would see a team playing together. So that's where I wind up. Like, that's where you just give me a center that plays defense. Give me JJ Redick to spread the floor and move off screens. God, I think about JJ Redick running off a screen set by Zion Williamson. He's got he's got a lot more daylight than he ever had in 4 years at Duke.
I think Duke should hire you, man. You need roster building. I think that's what that was the exercise. We don't need a
hopefully they have smarter people than me running the roster building at Duke.
Be surprised, man. Like, cause I feel like sometimes, because listen, man, like when I heard Dan Hurley say the other day when people were talking about transfer portal, oh, you brought in Aiden Mahaney, you brought in Terrace Reed. They weren't, top transfers. And he said, all due respect to outside entities, they were high on our recruiting board. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so it doesn't matter. Like, I feel like sometimes when we look at On3 or 24/7, who does the ratings doesn't matter. There's consensus guys like Cooper Flagg that everyone wanted, but outside of that, it's kind of like, who fits your system, right? Who do you want and where you going?
I mean, the prime example of that for me is covering the other half of my job, covering Wake Forest and Steve Forbes. Like, he's told me multiple times about how I can't remember the specific schools, but like the team that they beat to get Andrew Carr was a mid-mate. I think it was St. Louis.
Yeah.
The team that they beat for Alondas Williams was like St. Joe's. The team that they beat for Jake LaRavia, an Indiana State transfer, winds up being the 20th overall pick of the draft. Like, maybe Temple was who they had to beat for him. Like, the phrase that Forbes has that he loves, and it's a quote from The Grinch. I think it's from the Jim Carrey one. One man's toxic sludge is another man's potpourri.
Yeah.
And it's beauty is in the eye of the beholder in the transfer portal, and you can make players out of, who everybody else thinks is the 113th best transfer in the class. It's like, hey, that's Dalton Connect. He's the SEC player of the year. You guys are all wrong.
What I love about that, and shout out Steve Forbes, great dude, is, after UConn got Terrace Reed Jr., a couple of guys went on and said, he might be the dumbest player that's ever played at Michigan. Like, I've heard all of the negative stuff about him at Michigan. And then same with Aiden Mahaney, like, Aiden's a smaller point guard, all this different stuff. It's like, I think what we need to do here is take a step back and realize that the team that just put them on their roster just won 12 straight NCAA tournament games by an average of 15 points a game. So what you think of that player may not mesh with what they think of. And I think I'm going to lean with the guys that just won 2 national championships. That's me. I don't know about it.
I'll go blue in the face trying to understand why people don't give benefit of the doubt to established coaching staffs.
Yeah, it'd be different if we were in the Kevin Ollie era still and we were concerned about the talent coming in. But at this point, I think UConn fans are pretty happy. But to wrap this up and say one more time to let you guys know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on the Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top stories of today with all the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available in the free Fire TV channels app. Before we go, Connor, tell everyone where they can find your stuff. I don't know how many UConn fans will be on Devils Illustrated, but they may be looking behind enemy lines. You never know. So please give them your socials where they can find your stuff, and then we'll close it out.
Yeah, Duke.rivals.com is the Duke website, Devils Illustrated. If you want to check out the Wake stuff, that's wakeforest.rivals.com. A lot of good stuff on both. It's a lot of college baseball right now. It's that time of year, but we'll be firing up with some summer football stuff and always looking for fresh basketball content and ideas. So we'll keep the train rolling at those two places.
Absolutely, and I appreciate you coming on. Hopefully, either if UConn plays a Wake Forest or a Duke in basketball coming up. Is UConn football playing Duke this year? Am I getting that wrong?
I actually think both of them are playing UConn football this year.
Wake and Duke, huh?
Yep. Duke on September 14th, and Wake squeezed them in. Wake is going to UConn on October 19th.
All right. Well, UConn football, baby. It's fantastic. We're going to be all right. Outside of that, if maybe we can get together for some content for that when that comes about. But this has been another episode of Locked On UConn. I'm your host, Mark Zanetto, for Conor O'Neill, asking you to stay locked in, stay connected, make sure your toughness meter is always rising. And as always, go Huskies.